My name is Poppy Hawkins, and for 15 years I was the ghost in the machine at Aura Collective. Not a malevolent spirit, but the soul. The quiet, invisible force that gave one of New York's top branding agencies its memory, its conscience, and its edge. I was the head of archives and brand legacy, a title that sounds like it belongs to a gentle woman in a cardigan surrounded by dusty books. They got the cardigan part right, but they misunderstood the rest. My archive wasn't made of paper. It was made of light and logic and $1 billion of intellectual property. I called it the Prism. The Prism wasn't just a server farm in the sub-basement. It was a proprietary, encrypted digital ecosystem I architected from the ground up. It was a self-learning AI that didn't just store data, it ingested the DNA of every brand we ever touched. It understood the subtle shift in a shade of blue between a luxury car brand and a tech startup. It could predict cultural trends by analyzing the semiotics of 1,000 forgotten ad campaigns. The Prism was Aura's secret god, and I was its only high priestess. It was the reason we won accounts no one else could touch. And it was tied, inextricably and invisibly to me, to my very biology. This is not a story about a woman who was fired. It's a story about a woman who was erased. And it's a story about how I made them remember my name by taking away their future. The betrayal didn't come like a thunderclap. It was a quiet theft, performed under fluorescent lights with a polite smile, orchestrated by the two people I should have trusted the least. The first was Julian Croft. Julian was our new chief creative officer, a man who looked like he was sculpted from marble and ambition. 45, with a mane of silver hair, a Harvard MBA, and a resume that read like a masterclass in failing upwards through 3 different agencies. He had a voice like warm honey and eyes that were perpetually scanning the room for the next rung on the ladder. He'd been at Aura for exactly 57 days, and in that time he had questioned every process, challenged every veteran, and charmed every executive who didn't look too closely. The second, and this one still aches, was Clara Vance. My protégée. I'd found her 5 years ago, a brilliant but shy graphic designer lost in the shuffle. I saw the spark in her, the way she understood that a brand wasn't a logo, but a story. I mentored her, championed her, and watched her blossom. We shared lunches, secrets, and a genuine friendship I thought was built on mutual respect. She was the one I was grooming to one day understand the deeper secrets of the Prism. She was my friend. The plan to erase me began the day Julian realized that the source of all the agency's best ideas, the deepest insights, and the most compelling data all flowed from my quiet department in the basement. He didn't see a valuable asset. He saw a gatekeeper. And Julian Croft did not tolerate gates he didn't hold the key to. It all came to a head on a Wednesday afternoon, the most important meeting of the year. We were pitching to retain Elysian Motors, a high-end electric car brand whose account was worth $300 million a year. It was our flagship client. Losing them would be catastrophic. The entire executive team was assembled in the main boardroom, the one with the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline that was supposed to make clients feel powerful and small at the same time. For the past 6 months, I had been deep inside the Prism, working on a secret project I called Project Legacy. I had tasked the AI with creating a generational branding strategy for Elysian, something that would carry them for the next 50 years. It involved an entirely new visual language, a psychographic profile of their future consumer base, and a market strategy so nuanced and predictive it was practically a prophecy. It was my masterwork. I had shared the initial findings only with Clara, trusting her to give me creative feedback before I presented it to the board. That was my first mistake. The lights dimmed. Julian and Clara walked to the front of the room. Julian smiled his 1,000-watt smile. "Good afternoon, everyone. What we are about to show you is not just a campaign. It is the future. A future that my brilliant team, led by the incomparable Clara Vance, has envisioned." The presentation began. And my world tilted on its axis. On the massive screen, I saw my work. Not an interpretation of it, not an evolution of it. My work, my slides, my data visualizations, the specific color palette I had spent weeks refining, the key phrases I had coined, the entire 50-year strategy laid bare. They had stolen my soul and were parading it around in a new suit. I sat there, frozen. My blood ran cold. I could feel 12 pairs of eyes in the room, all of them carefully avoiding mine. I looked at Clara. She stood beside Julian, her face glowing in the light of the projector, a small, triumphant smile on her lips. She wouldn't look at me. She just kept her eyes on the screen, on my work being presented as her own. When the presentation finished, the room erupted in applause. The Elysian executives were ecstatic. Our CEO, a man who usually looked perpetually bored, was beaming. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to say something. My voice felt like rust in my throat, but I forced the words out. This is based on the research from Project Legacy. Julian turned to me, his expression one of perfect, practiced politeness. He even managed a small, indulgent chuckle. Ah, Poppy. Yes, thank you for your contribution. The raw data your department provided was a wonderful foundation for our creative team to build upon. It's amazing what real visionaries can do when they have something to work with. And just like that, I was dismissed. My 6 months of intellectual and creative labor were reduced to raw data. I was no longer the architect, I was the bricklayer. In that moment, Julian did more than steal my work. He tried to steal my identity. He tried to make me small. The room was silent again, the air thick with embarrassment. No one defended me, not my colleagues of 15 years, not the CEO whose company I had saved more than once. They just stared at their laptops, suddenly fascinated by their email inboxes. The isolation was absolute. The meeting ended. The deal was saved. Julian and Clara were heroes. I walked back to my office in a daze. An hour later, an email arrived from HR, CCing the entire executive team. It was a memo announcing a bold new corporate restructuring designed to synergize creative and data-driven assets. My department, archives, and brand legacy was being dissolved. Its functions would be absorbed into the creative department under the direct oversight of Clara Vance, who was being promoted to senior vice president. My new title was to be senior data analyst. It wasn't a demotion. It was an annihilation. I sat in my chair, the silence of my office humming around me. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. The shock was too profound. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. But then, as the minutes ticked by, something else began to form in the pit of my stomach. It was a cold, hard, and perfectly clear feeling. It was purpose. Julian and Clara had made 2 critical errors. Their first was believing I was just a librarian. Their second, and far more fatal error, was not understanding what the prism truly was. They thought it was a tool they could wield. They had no idea it was a living thing. And they had no idea that its life support was plugged directly into me. The system required a biometric handshake from its primary administrator every 72 hours. Not a password. A complex cryptographic key generated from my unique biological signature, verified through a series of secure protocols. It was a dead man's switch I had built into its core architecture years ago as a failsafe against exactly this kind of corporate espionage. If the prism didn't receive my handshake, it wouldn't just stop working. It would begin a process of data degradation. A graceful, initially imperceptible decay. The algorithms would begin to fray at the edges. The connections would weaken. The AI would start to forget. It would become unreliable, then erratic, then useless. Within 2 weeks, Aura's billion-dollar brain would be reduced to digital dementia. They thought they had stolen my work. They didn't realize they had just lit the fuse on a bomb sitting directly underneath their new thrones. I would not quit. I would not file a complaint with HR. That was their game, a world of paper trails and plausible deniability. My revenge would be silent, elegant, and absolute. I would play their game, but by my rules. My plan began to form, not in a blaze of fury, but in the quiet, methodical way I did everything. I accepted the new position. I smiled. I congratulated Clara on her promotion, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. She had the decency to look away, unable to meet my eyes. I told her I would prepare all the necessary handover documents to ensure a smooth transition. That evening, I did 2 things. First, I went home and poured myself a very expensive glass of scotch. I allowed myself exactly 1 hour to feel the full, crushing weight of the betrayal. I let the anger and the grief wash over me. Then, at precisely 8:00 p.m., I put it all away. I locked it in a box in the back of my mind to be dealt with later. Emotion was a liability. From now on, I would be a creature of pure strategy. Second, I logged into my system from home. I opened a new file, a handover document for Clara. It would be my greatest work of fiction. 200 pages of dense, impenetrable technical jargon filled with useless diagrams, circular logic, and instructions for surface-level functions that had no bearing on the system's core health. It would look impressive and be utterly worthless. It would be the perfect camouflage. Then I composed a single, simple email. I sent it to Marcus in IT, and I CC'd Julian and Clara. Subject: The Prism admin transition. Hi Marcus. As part of the new restructuring, I'll be transitioning administrative duties for the Prism. To ensure a smooth handover and system integrity, I will perform the final weekly core calibration under my admin credentials this Friday at 5:00 p.m. After that, access will be transferred to Clara's team. Best Poppy. I read the email over 3 times. Final weekly core calibration. They would read those words and understand nothing. They would see it as a procedural formality, a box to be checked. They had no idea it was a death sentence. The clock had started ticking. They had 72 hours from Friday at 5:00 p.m. before the decay began. And I would have a front row seat, sitting in my little demoted corner, watching them try to fly the most sophisticated aircraft in the world with a user manual written for a toaster. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It would be the sound of a system quietly, beautifully, and irreversibly falling apart. And it would be glorious. Monday morning felt different. The air in the office was thin, charged with the brittle energy of a freshly established regime. I walked past my old office, its glass walls now containing Clara. She was on the phone, pacing, trying to look like she belonged there. She didn't. She looked like a child playing dress-up in her mother's shoes. My new desk was in a forgotten corner of the open floor plan, a small gray cubicle wedged between a noisy printer and the ficus tree everyone forgot to water. It was a deliberate, petty humiliation, a public statement. Poppy Hawkins is no longer important. I arranged my few belongings, sat down, and smiled. I had the best seat in the house for the coming implosion. At 10 a.m., Clara approached my desk, holding a tablet like a shield. She was flanked by 2 junior creatives who looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. Poppy, she began, her voice a little too loud. As we discussed, I'll need the full administrative handover for the Prism. Documentation, protocols, everything. I slid a thick, freshly bound document across my desk. Of course, Clara, here you go. It landed with a satisfying thud. 212 pages, everything from basic query syntax to the server maintenance schedules. It's all in there. She picked it up, testing its weight. Good, thank you for your cooperation. She tried to meet my gaze to project authority, but her eyes darted away. She knew, deep down, she knew what she had done, and she was terrified of the woman to whom she had done it. My pleasure, I said, my voice even and calm. I'm here if you have any questions, as a senior data analyst. The first sign of trouble appeared at 3:15 p.m. that same day. It was beautiful in its subtlety. A junior designer on Clara's team was trying to pull brand assets for a new client, a high-end organic yogurt company. He ran a standard search in the Prism for imagery evoking natural purity and wellness. The system, in its nascent state of confusion, returned a single, high-resolution image, a blast furnace from a 1950s steel mill. The designer blinked. He reran the query. This time, he got a picture of a rusted battleship. Panic began to flicker in his eyes. Clara came over, saw the screen, and her face tightened. The search parameters must be wrong, she snapped. Run it again, but be more specific. They tried for 20 minutes. They got images of oil rigs, coal mines, and demolition sites. It was as if the Prism had developed a dark, industrial sense of humor. Clara, flustered, declared that the system was probably just re-indexing after the handover and moved on. I took a sip of my tea and made a small note on my pad. The decay had begun. Tuesday was louder. Clara's team was in a creative brainstorming session for a new perfume, Aura de Lune. They tried to use the Prism's AI-driven slogan generator, a tool that had won us 3 industry awards. They fed it the creative brief: ethereal, mysterious, feminine moonlight. After a long pause, the system spat out its first suggestion onto the main screen: Aura de Lune smells better than an engine fire. A nervous silence fell over the room, followed by a few stifled snickers. They tried again. Aura de Lune, for when the night demands industrial solvents. They tried a 3rd time. Aura de Lune, now with more rebar. Julian, who had been observing the session, stormed out of the room. The system wasn't just malfunctioning, it was mocking them. Later that afternoon, I received an email. It was from Leo, a young, brilliant designer who I had always liked. He was quiet, but he saw everything. The email was short and encrypted, something he must have learned to do in his spare time. Subject: No subject, Poppy, I don't know what's happening, but this isn't right. The system is sick. If you need anything, an extra set of eyes, a quiet conversation, just let me know. They were wrong to do what they did. I felt a flicker of warmth. It was a reminder that not everyone in this building was a coward or a vulture. I typed back a simple reply. Thank you, Leo. I appreciate that more than you know. Stay observant. I now had an ally, a small listening post in the heart of their growing panic. The true crisis hit on Wednesday. It was the moment the problem escalated from embarrassing to existential. Julian was walking a group of potential investors through the agency, showing off our capabilities. He brought them to the main media room to demonstrate the power of the prism. Here, he announced with a flourish, is the beating heart of Aura. Every piece of work we have ever created, every ad, every film, instantly accessible. He instructed Clara to pull up the award-winning television commercial we had created for Elysian Motors last year. Clara, looking nervous, typed in the command. The file appeared on the screen. She clicked play. For a single second, the iconic opening shot of the Elysian sedan driving along a moonlit coast appeared. Then it dissolved into a screaming chaos of digital artifacts. The screen filled with green and purple blocks, the audio became a screeching wall of static. It looked like the system was being violently ill. Julian laughed it off. A small glitch, he said, his voice a little too high. Let's try another one. They tried another. The same result. They tried a third, a famous print campaign. The images loaded, but they were grotesquely distorted, the models' faces stretched into monstrous shapes. One of the investors raised an eyebrow. Is all of your data secure, Mr. Croft? Julian's smile was a paper-thin mask over a chasm of fear. He assured them it was a minor network issue. But when they left, the mask fell. He turned to Marcus, our head of IT, who had been summoned and was now typing frantically at a console. What is going on? Julian hissed, his voice low and venomous. Marcus, a man who was usually unflappable, looked pale. I don't know, Julian. I've run every diagnostic. There's no virus, no hardware failure, no network breach. The system architecture it's degrading. It's like the code is unspooling. It's not a hardware problem. It's like the ghost in the machine is having a stroke. Honestly, Poppy was the only one who ever understood its deep-level protocols. It was her baby. That was when Julian's eyes found me, sitting in my corner, quietly typing. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. I could feel the heat of his gaze. I could feel the moment he finally understood that this was not a random act of technology. This was a response. Thursday afternoon, I was summoned. Not by email, not by a manager, but by Julian himself. He appeared at my desk. My office, now. I found him and Clara waiting for me in the main boardroom, the same room where I had been publicly humiliated just over a week ago. The power dynamic had inverted completely. They no longer looked like victors. They looked like defendants. Julian had shed his charming facade. His face was drawn, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Clara just looked broken, staring at the polished surface of the table as if hoping it would swallow her whole. All right, Poppy, Julian began, dispensing with any pretense. The games are over. The system is failing. We know you have something to do with it. I want you to fix it. Now. I took a moment before I answered. I looked from his angry, desperate face to Clara's miserable one. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. A game. I finally said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of cold steel. You think this is a game? I placed my laptop on the table and opened it. I turned the screen towards them. On it was a file directory, the original project folder for Project Legacy. I clicked open a file. It was my initial Elysian Motors strategy document, complete with metadata showing it was created 7 months ago. I opened another. A video file of me talking through the core concepts, time-stamped from last May. Evidence. Cold, hard, undeniable proof of their theft. The Prism is not just a collection of files, Julian, I said, my voice never rising. It's an ecosystem. It was built on a foundational principle of integrity. It learns, it adapts, and its primary function is to preserve the truth of a brand's legacy. You and Clara, you took my work, a work of truth, and you fed the system a lie. You presented it as your own, you corrupted its most fundamental purpose. Julian stared at the screen, speechless. Clara began to quietly cry. The system isn't broken, I continued, looking directly at him. It's responding to the poison you introduced. It's rejecting you. Its logic cores are failing because you introduced a paradox it cannot solve, that its designated leaders are thieves. This isn't a technical problem. It's a moral one. Julian finally found his voice. What do you want, Poppy? Money? A promotion? Name your price, just fix it. I slowly closed my laptop. I stood up. The final meeting with Elysian Motors, the one to sign the $300 million contract, was scheduled for Monday morning. They couldn't walk into that meeting with a dead system and a portfolio of corrupted case studies. They were out of time. "I don't want your money, Julian," I said, walking towards the door. "What I want is for you to understand the consequences of your actions. You have until the Elysian meeting on Monday. That gives you 3 days." He stood up, his face turning red. 3 days to do what? I paused at the door and looked back at them, 2 shipwrecked captains on a sinking vessel of their own making. "That," I said, "is your problem to solve." I walked out, leaving them in the silent, expensive, and utterly terrified tomb they had built for themselves. My revenge was no longer just a plan. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was just getting started. The weekend was an exercise in strategic silence. I knew that at the Aura Collective offices, a storm of impotent fury was raging. I could picture Julian, his handsome face contorted with a rage that had no outlet, barking orders at a terrified IT department. I could see Marcus, a good man caught in the crossfire, running the same futile diagnostics over and over, explaining for the 10th time that you can't fix a soul with a software patch. I imagined Clara, locked in her new glass office, the walls feeling more like a cage than a trophy, watching her stolen future crumble into digital dust. I, on the other hand, spent Saturday morning at the Met. I stood for a long time in front of Vermeer's, young woman with a water pitcher, mesmerized by the quiet dignity of it. The way the light fell on the wall, the simple, focused purpose of the subject. It was a painting about integrity, about finding grace in doing a task correctly with honesty. It was everything Julian and Clara were not. I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. This wasn't just revenge, it was a restoration of order. On Sunday, I stayed home. I repotted my orchids, the methodical process of tending to their roots grounding me. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, remained silent until precisely 4:17 p.m., a blocked number. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered. "Poppy Hawkins." The voice was not Julian's. It was thinner, older, and carried the effortless authority of someone who hadn't needed to raise their voice in 40 years. It was Amelia Davenport, the founder. The legend. The woman who had hired me 15 years ago with a single handshake. "Poppy, it's Amelia. I've been enjoying my retirement in the Hamptons, and I find myself interrupted by a series of frantic phone calls from my board of directors. They tell me the company I built is having a nervous breakdown. They tell me our $300 million Elysian account is about to evaporate. And then, finally, one of them had the courage to tell me the truth. They told me about you. So you will now tell me everything from the beginning without embellishment." She was not asking, she was commanding, and so I told her. I laid it all out with the dispassionate clarity of a legal brief. I told her about Project Legacy, the months of my life poured into it. I told her about the presentation, the public theft of my work, the casual cruelty of Julian's dismissal, the complicity of Clara's silence. Then I explained the prism, not the technical specs, but its philosophy. I explained that I had built it to be a reflection of the company's best self, a repository of its institutional memory and its creative integrity. So when Julian and Clara fed it a lie, I concluded, a fundamental betrayal of that integrity, the system couldn't cope. "It's not a glitch, Mrs. Davenport. It's an autoimmune response. The prism is attacking a disease it found in its own leadership." The silence on the other end was long and heavy. I could hear the faint sound of the ocean in the background of her call. "So, Julian tried to erase the company's memory," she finally said, her voice laced with ice. "And in doing so, he has given the company amnesia. The poetry of it is almost exquisite. What is your diagnosis, Poppy? As a leader, not as a technician." "The diagnosis is a cancer of arrogance and a profound lack of character," I stated plainly. "The treatment is radical surgery." "I see," she said. "And I assume you are the only surgeon qualified to operate. State your terms." This was the fulcrum on which my future and the company's would pivot. I took a breath, my voice steady and devoid of any tremble. "These are not terms for my benefit, Mrs. Davenport. They are the necessary conditions to ensure the long-term health and soul of this company. First, Julian Croft and Clara Vance are to be terminated, effective immediately, for cause. Their actions constitute gross ethical misconduct and deliberate destruction of company assets. I want them gone before I set foot in that building again." "Done," she said without hesitation. "What's next?" "Second, the Department of Brand Legacy and Archives is reinstated and expanded into a new, independent division, the Center for Legacy and Core Innovation. It will function as the creative and ethical heart of the company." I will be its president with full autonomy, reporting only to the CEO. A logical move, Amelia conceded. Continue. Third, Leo Chen is to be promoted to creative director of this new division. He is a generational talent who has been stifled by a culture that rewards sycophants over artists. His voice is essential for our future. I've seen his work. An excellent choice, she said. Fourth, I pressed on, a formal public apology must be issued from the board to all employees. It must acknowledge the violation of trust and unequivocally state that intellectual property is the company's most sacred asset. The culture of fear that allowed this to happen must be dismantled from the top down. And finally, she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Finally, I require a 5% equity stake in Aura Collective, I said, because I have bled for this company for 15 years. I built its most valuable asset with my own 2 hands. I will not allow its soul to be bartered away by another transient executive with a good haircut and a hollow heart ever again. My investment will be my guarantee. There was another long pause. I could hear her thinking, weighing the cost of my demands against the cost of total annihilation. 5% is a significant stake, Poppy. $300 million is a significant contract, I countered. And a 50-year reputation is a priceless asset. I am not just restoring a server, Mrs. Davenport, I am restoring your legacy. A slow, dry chuckle came through the phone. It was the sound of a predator recognizing another. You are more ruthless than I remembered. I admire that. Very well. The board can cry about it later. You have your terms. A car will be at your apartment at 5:30 a.m. tomorrow with the signed contract. I expect you to be at the office by 6. The Elysian meeting is at 10. Do not be late. The line went dead. I walked into the Aura Collective offices the next morning as the sun was beginning to touch the tops of the skyscrapers. The building was quiet, but a current of nervous energy was palpable. The few people there stared at me, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. I was no longer Poppy from the basement. I was a myth come to life. Leo was waiting for me outside the server room, his eyes wide. They're gone, he whispered. Julian and Clara. Security escorted them out last night. Their offices are empty. Good, I said, placing my hand on the biometric scanner. Then the healing can begin. The doors hissed open. The room was cold, the hum of the servers a low, mournful drone. The main console screen was a field of red error messages. A calm, synthesized voice spoke from the ceiling. Welcome back, Administrator Hawkins. System integrity at 37%. Widespread data corruption detected. Core logic paradox unresolved. Catastrophic failure imminent. Let's get to work, I said to Leo. For the next 3 hours, we didn't just repair the system, we resurrected it. It was a complex dance of code and intuition. I didn't just type commands, I spoke to the machine, explaining where the logic had been broken, where the trust had been violated. I showed Leo the deep architecture, the secret backdoors and fail-safe protocols I had built. I was passing on the torch, ensuring the prism would never be an orphan again. I purged the Julian paradox, the logical loop that had been tearing the AI apart. We carefully restored the corrupted video files from a deep-level backup I had hidden offsite. It was like watching a patient slowly regain their memory after a traumatic injury. At 9:55 a.m., the last red light on the console blinked and turned a steady, healthy green. The voice spoke again, its tone different, clearer. System integrity restored to 100%. All functions nominal. Ethical subroutines recalibrated. Welcome home, Poppy. We walked into the boardroom at exactly 10:00 a.m. The Elysian executives sat at one side of the table, their expressions grim. They were expecting a disaster. What they got was a revelation. Leo and I didn't just present the strategy I had originally created. We presented a better one. Infused with Leo's fresh creative vision, it was smarter, bolder, and more emotionally resonant. We showed them not just a path forward for their brand, but a reflection of their deepest aspirations. When we finished, the CEO of Elysian Motors, a severe-looking man named Mr. Thorne, stood up. He didn't speak to his team. He spoke directly to me. Ms. Hawkins, he said, in the last week, we have received a dozen panicked calls from Mr. Croft, each one less coherent than the last. We were prepared to terminate our relationship with this agency today. But what you have shown us is not an advertisement. It is a philosophy. It is clear now who the true heart of this company is. He extended his hand. You have our business. The contract is yours. My revenge was not the fall of Julian and Clara. That was just a necessary consequence. My true revenge was the act of rebuilding. It was in the creation of my new division, a safe harbor for the brilliant and the honest. It was in the look on Leo's face when he saw his ideas celebrated. It was in the restored hum of the prism, a sound of integrity made manifest. Julian and Clara had seen competence and thought it was a commodity to be exploited. They saw a quiet woman in a cardigan and thought she was furniture. They failed to understand that competence isn't the thing you see. It is the foundation that everything else is built upon. And if you try to dynamite the foundation, the whole glorious, glittering skyscraper comes crashing down on your head. I didn't just get my job back. I got my name back, and I had rebuilt the house on a foundation of solid rock.